Bet horse racing on DRF Bets. We'll match your first deposit of $200. Get free expert picks and past performances, plus weekly cash back. All from Daily Racing Form, the most trusted name in horse racing.
Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here, taking a look at one of 4 stakes races on Saturday at Belmont at the Big A, or Aqueduct. The last of those stakes races that they'll run on that Saturday card is race 9, the Grade 3 Bold Ruler Stakes, 6 furlongs on the main track for some older sprinters. And some of the other stakes at Aqueduct Saturday, Craig, drew some smaller fields. Not so here. We've got 10 runners signed on, and it's a pretty competitive affair.
I think it was a pretty good idea scheduling a grade 3 just shortly before the Breeders' Cup, because it's just going to draw a different kind of horse, and it led to getting a nice big field in this spot.
Yeah, had trouble making a morning line in this race. It just seems really wide open. I made the number 4 Jackson Traveler the lukewarm morning line favorite at 7-2, but he's certainly not a standout in here, as you can make a case for most of the 10 runners in this field. To try to get some clarity on how this race might be run, let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector. And Craig, there's no fast pace flag showing up here, but I'm not going to be surprised if this pace does heat up a little bit, because the horse that's drawn the rail, Meras, is very fast, and he has to be committed to going from the inside.
He does. I'm just not sure who else would keep up with him. I expect him to make the lead from that inside post, and it's just a matter of how much he can rate. He didn't do a whole lot of rating last time, though I wouldn't call him a runoff, but he got a little bit tired. But outside of him, I don't see any real true speed horses in here.
I mean, I think there are others that do want to be forwardly placed, particularly the 4, 5, and 6. Jackson Traveler may be more of a stalking type, but Greeley and Ben sometimes does his better running up on the pace. The number 6 Steinbeck is one of 3 runners in this race for trainer Norman Cash, and seems to have the most speed of any of them. So you'd imagine that they'll try to use him maybe to set up some of the late runs of some other horses for him in this race. So we'll see if they can keep up with Meras early, but that horse clearly is very fast on the Timeform US pace figures. I think his early pace rating is a 135. So that's why he's shown in front early in this race. We'll get to him in just a little bit, but let's start our discussion of the contenders with that lukewarm morning line favorite, the number 4 Jackson Traveler. And we'll go 3 starts back to take a look at his last victory in the Grade 3 Maryland Sprint. Craig, that was a Grade 3 and this is a Grade 3, but this one seemed like a much weaker race overall.
This one we're watching, yes. Outside of Sibelius, who actually ran really well, though he came back to disappoint. Jackson Traveler, he disappointed a little bit that day. He was 9-5. I think he was about the co-favorite with Sibelius. Didn't show the normal early speed that we had seen from him before, and I think it cost him in the end, as that one was just able to run away. I think he's the logical favorite in here. I agree with you. It would be pretty lukewarm, but he's been the most consistent, runs good speed figures, always seems to run a decent race. So he's certainly a contender.
Yeah, and the replay we were looking at was the race 3 back. That was the slow-paced victory in the Maryland Sprint, which he just wasn't beating a very good field that day. You can see those blue color-coded pace figures in the Timeform US PPs. But I agree with what Craig said about his last race at Pimlico. Sibelius was in great form at that time, just a better horse right now, and Jackson Traveler really no match for him. Speed figures are okay. They put him in the mix here, but I didn't see him as having any edge on this field. And going out for West Point, he's a horse that often takes a lot of money, and I expect him to be a relatively short price once again in here. Let's take a look at a couple of horses coming out of a local stakes race earlier in this Aqueduct meet. That was the Grade 2 Vosburg. Both Eastern Bay and Drafted competed in there, and we'll check out the stretch run of this race. Nobody in here, Craig, was any match for the heavily favored winner, Elite Power, who will be going on to compete in the Breeders' Cup Sprint next. I thought, though, Eastern Bay did make a nice late run up for second into a pretty slow pace up front.
Right. I know both of us tried to beat Elite Power that day with the 2 horses in behind them, Eastern Bay and the other one who's I just drew a blank. But yeah, it's it wasn't the strongest Vosburg. Yes, drafted. It's not the strongest. It wasn't the strongest Vosburg by a long shot. I think Elite Power just kind of won by default. As I said, we picked 2 8-year-old geldings in that race, which kind of shows you it was a down year or so. I'm not all that high on them when they couldn't get the job done there. They ran the race fine, but I think they might get a little overbet just because it was the Vosburg.
Yeah, Eastern Bay has been in great form this year. He has a horse that has really stood up to this aggressive schedule that most of the runners in the Norman Cash Bar have to endure. But he ran his typical good race last time in the Vosburg, and this is a spot that does not have a standout like Elite Power. So perhaps he can be more effective here, especially if there's some more pace up front. As for Drafted, who's coming out of that same race, Craig, I've got to be honest, just given how consistent Drafted's been in the past, I was left a little cold by his Vosburg last time. The fact that he wasn't able to close with the same late vigor that Eastern Bay was. And in the final eighth of a mile, he kind of just really tied up and didn't have much to offer. Almost got passed for third there, just edging out a runner that was coming back at him by half a length. So to me, Drafted has to prove that he's still in the kind of form where he can win a race like this.
Right. I guess the one excuse you could use is it was 7 furlongs, but he's run okay at that distance before. And personally, I found a hard time finding a reason that he'd be able to turn the tables just on Eastern Bay based on that effort.
There are just 2 3-year-olds in this field. One of them's a big price, though. The horse among the 3-year-olds that could take some money, though, is the number 8, Runnin' Son of a Gun. Let's take a look at his last race in the Gallant Bob from Parks. And Craig didn't have the easiest trip this day, was trying to make a run on the outside at the start of the far turn, ran into the traffic. Luis Ayes had to pull back on the reins, angle him back to the inside. This was a race that was dominated by some outside movers in the stretch, so maybe making that late run up the rail wasn't ideal. But once again, he finished well and achieved yet another graded stakes placing against some good 3-year-olds. This horse has been in career form and just seemed to keep getting better at big prices over the summer. Now he's facing older horses for the first time.
He's been one of the claims of the year. I mean, he was claimed for $40,000 and has done nothing but run. He actually may have been claimed on the last day of last year, but he's racked up the money. My one concern with him is he just kind of seems to run to the competition. He hasn't been getting those wins, even though he's picking up the placings. And they're just kind of where races where it seems he just kind of picks up the pieces without ever really being a contender in the race.
Yeah, also, I would say that the Gallant Bob field he was facing last time, not nearly of the quality of the Alan Jerkins in his prior start. And that's kind of a testament to what you said, that he was able to finish third in both races, despite the fact that there were no Jack Christophers or Gunites last time. Maybe the trouble had something to do with that, but he's going to have to run a little faster than his prior start here. If he runs back to that Alan Jerkins performance, he's probably going to win. So remains to be seen what we get from Runnin' Son of a Gun in this bold ruler. The horse that the pace projector showed on the front end is the number 1 Miraz. And let's go back to his last victory, which was across the globe and all the way back in February in the Al Shindaga Sprint over at Meydan in Dubai. And Craig, this is a horse who was able to take this early speed to Saratoga last time, not quite able to sustain it as well as he did on this day back in February, but this is a horse who was very fast out of the gate.
He is. He's a horse who seemed to find a new lease on life when they put him on dirt. He was just kind of clunking around, running okay. Had picked up a few wins on synthetic and turf, but he just looked like a different horse when he moved to the dirt. He ran much better time form ratings, and I was actually pretty impressed with his start at Saratoga off of that pretty long layoff. I think it was about 6 months, maybe a little bit more, and so he understandably got a little bit tired late, and that was a race won by Elite Power, who we've already talked about. Just a much better horse than what we're going to see in the rest of this field.
I'll say I would have loved him in that Vosburg if he had run there instead, but I know the connections probably didn't want to try 7 furlongs, but that race was crying out for a speed horse like him. He'll instead run in this spot where there is some other speed to his outside, but as we were talking about with regard to the pace projector, Miraz might just be naturally faster than those horses. He's going to have to sustain his speed a little better than last time, but that was his first start off the layoff. We'll see how much money he takes here coming back for his second start at the U.S. with Flavien Prat climbing aboard. Got the horse coming in from out of town, Craig, that I think you and I both find a little bit intriguing. That's the number 3, Factor It In. Let's take a look at his last victory at Laurel in the Chaladon Stakes. And I liked the way this horse finished. This gray blinkered son of the Factor coming through between horses in the slop here. He really powers away from this field late, and he seems like one, now that he's come back for his 6-year-old season, has just taken a step forward and gained some consistency that he didn't have in the past.
That's exactly what caught my eye was the finish. It wasn't the strongest pace in that race. We have the half mile coated in blue, and he just pulled away from the field. And there were some pretty decent sprinters in there, including a runner-up, Yudel who always seems to show up and run a good race. And I thought he did that day. But factor it in, as you said, he's a horse who, since that layoff, has taken a small step forward each time. And if he has another forward step in him, he could be dangerous.
Yeah, and I'll even say about his race too back at Colonial. That's one that's worth going back and watching. The horse that won that race, Necker Island, was DQ'd for fouling. Factor it in, and there's an argument when you watch that race. Factor it in might have won if he hadn't gotten squeezed back between horses at the 8th pole. So he could be coming into this race with a 3-race winning streak, if not for that trouble two back. And I wasn't particularly familiar with this trainer, Carlos Mancia, but I was looking him up in DRF Formulator, and he has a 205 ROI with all starters over the past 5 years. So certainly can train a horse. So factored in, I think, is one that is pretty interesting shipping in for this bold ruler. Couple other horses at bigger prices that we could mention, Craig. The number 9 Repo Rocks is one that lacks some consistency at times, and he's coming off one of his poor efforts lately in the race at Parks last time over a sloppy track that he just didn't seem to handle. But on this horse's best day, he's got some speed figures that could put him in the mix.
He has definitely popped some big races in his day. He had a win at Belmont earlier this spring where he ran a 119 speed figure, which would certainly be very strong in this field. But he just seems one to me that's going the wrong direction. You can see his speed figures have regressed since that third behind Life is Good. And I have to wonder if chasing that monster around the track just didn't take a little bit out of this guy.
Yeah, he actually ran pretty well that day to be just 2.5 lengths behind Speaker's Corner, and didn't run so badly at Saratoga 2 back either, behind a horse who just won on the front end in a day when it seemed like that was the running style you wanted. His last race at Parks is concerning, but that was a day where a lot of horses didn't handle that sloppy track, so we'll see if he can bounce back here. And then we have the likable 8-year-old gelding Greeley and Ben, Craig, a horse that went on a tear in 2021, winning 11 of 15 starts, albeit not quite at the graded stakes level at most of those. Hasn't had the same magic as he's been claimed a couple times this year, but he's certainly a horse that can run a big race when he's feeling good.
He's a horse I saw run a few times here at Remington Park, my home track. And one thing I know for sure about him is he's a gritty horse. He's always going to give you his best effort. You could see it in his win 2 back when he was dropped in for that claiming tag, was taken right out of it, ran a nice race back to Morello, a horse who's actually running on this card in the grade 2 Kelso. So I don't want to knock him too much. It just seems like he's not really running as fast as he did last year. Well, he's not running as fast on Timeform US speed figures. And second off the claim, he would have to find a pretty big jump to be a contender.
Well, let's take a look at our top picks for this race. And Craig, you can't resist the speed of that rail horse Maras. I agree. He's supposed to be in front of these early. And the way this track at Aqueduct plays at times, there are days where the speed just doesn't come back. So we'll see if that's the case on Saturday for him.
He's a horse I'm counting on some improvement. Second time off the layoff. I like those Timeform ratings in his 2 dirt races, which would make him the horse to beat in this field. And I think we're going to see it. Maybe he'll get challenged, but I just have a feeling he's naturally faster than the others who might try to keep up with him early.
I'm obviously hoping this race does come apart a little bit. We'll see if that can happen. If Maras comes back to the field, I think it's really dependent on how well he runs, whether this pace can come apart. But I like the number 3 factored in, and I know you agree, Craig. You have him as your second pick. Just really like the form that this horse has been in this year since coming back as a 6-year-old, and was impressed by the victory last time. And going out for low-profile connections, I wonder if he could fly under the radar a little bit here. I've got him at 8-1 on the morning line. We'll see if he goes off that high. And I also have the number 8 running son of a gun in there. He's another one that has some big races on his PP. We'll see if he can finally break through with a victory. Well, that's a look at the Bold Ruler Stakes on Saturday at Aqueduct. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.